Greetings and welcome to Enigmatic. I hope you all are doing well on this nice, cool Sunday morning. I woke up this morning with kind of a inspiration for what I want to speak about today. For the longest time, I just felt like I haven't had very much direction in life and don't know what to do with myself and things like that. And I've talked about how it's hard for me to kind of give myself what I want, and that I have a fucked up relationship with myself, right? And how a lot of that can be traced back to not only the fact that I'm a critical thinker, and I try to be extremely honest and candid with myself, but also as a result of trauma. I've talked about things like the dominant other and whatnot, but I feel that in the layer peeling process that is healing, and as I continue to process and clear the weeds out of the garden that is my mind, there's certain things I'm starting to become more comfortable with, sharing and stating, or at least saying to myself, really, at the end of the day. Because what really matters is the understanding that we give ourselves. And sometimes we worry about other people not understanding because we haven't fully provided ourselves with that level of understanding. And so all that being said, I've kind of come to the realization lately that due to the fact that I haven't had really any role models, any mentor, I don't really ever look at as an actual mentor. And I don't feel like I've ever had, a teacher, aside from just like general teachers that you have, but like for like a practice of some sort, or of, kind of being part of your being. So like, for example, with meditation, I've never had a meditation teacher. I'm an autodidact. I'm an autodidact in a lot of things. And that's something that I feel good about, is that, since I was young, since I, was disillusioned by my father at a very early age, I, did my best to kind of figure things out on my own. And so that being said, I'd like to give a caveat that there were two books that I took pages from in my development at a very early age. And it was something that I noticed, and I don't feel like it gets noticed very often. And that's something that actually makes me uncomfortable, because I don't like to be like, I noticed this and nobody else did. I like think about the air that just comes around that, the energy. But all the same, I don't think that that means that there aren't instances where that, can happen. Certain unpopular ideas might be the ones with the most veracity. It makes me think of a billboard I saw when I was a little boy that said 1 million people can be wrong and one person can be right. So it just kind of like encourages us to critically think. And then that also being said, there's been social experiments done where one person that is part of the experiment is really the test subject, is in a room with a bunch of other people that are aware that the test is happening, and they'll be asked a question, and the majority of people will purposefully answer it wrong to see if the person being tested will actually answer it the correct way, or if they'll follow suit with everyone else. Which you'd be surprised by the statistic of how much people will follow the trend of everybody else around them. So coming back to what I really wanted to say is that the two books that I took pages out of growing up were Jesus, only because that was something that was part of my environment. Growing up in the United States, it's a Christian country, and when it comes to our morals and how we treat each other and things like that, that's the schematic that we have chosen through the lens of religion, right? Then the other book was Buddha's book, and that was by proxy of my interest in philosophy and being introduced to Eastern thought by someone who, I guess technically they would have been a mentor, but I just never looked at them that way. When I was in high school, really it was a person that had my best interests at heart, and I didn't really see it, and she really looked out for me, so I really appreciate her for that. But the lesson that I took from them that I think kind of goes by the wayside for most people, was that they didn't wait to be told what was up. They didn't wait to be told how to live life. Um, they went and figured it out. They kind of defined things on their terms for what made sense to them and what worked for them, because we're all different. This is something I've noticed like very early on. We don't have like the same types of experiences. We might all experience consciousness differently. Like, for example, you can notice lack of consistency between people when identifying colors and differences in colors on color gradients. I recently learned that there's only some people that can smell the pungent odor of urine when somebody's eaten asparagus. So it's like, what else are we, missing? And so, that being said, something else that I noticed very early on, and I just didn't have the words for it. Um, and I feel like some of that was because I was like sheltered so hard out of like a need of control by my father. But um, sorry, I lost my way a little bit. But I guess the thing that I wanted to say is that, we have all these systems that we use to tell us about the world, and we don't notice, or we neglect, or we take for granted that they all have limits. Even science has a limit. Um, so like one, science has certain metaphysical assumptions that it operates off of, and by operating off of those metaphysical assumptions, it dismisses other things that might be part of reality. Then science is also extremely limited as to what it can study, because it only studies physical phenomena. And while we try to reduce everything down to physical phenomena, that might be an error on our part, and that's trying to force a circular peg into a square hole. But we're not sure. And part of it is an issue with pragmatism, where we want things to be pragmatic, and if a certain answer isn't practical, then we don't really want to use it. But what if that is the reality of the situation, that it's not practical? It's kind of like a unspoken assumption in science that things are practical. Um, and so the point that I'm getting at, because we can do this with math isn't totally consistent. We can look at the attempts by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead to systematize a consistent mathematical system in Principia Mathematica. And then we have, Kurt Gödel that comes along and shows that any consistent or complete system is inherently incomplete, which I'm not going to get into all the details about that, but it just shows that no system that we use and that is derived by humans is going to be apt to explain the totality of what we exist in. So there's always limits. And that's something that's very interesting to me. But the effect that has had, that realization has had for me, is that I'm not convinced very easily. I'm very much what I like to call a paradigm hopper. And that's something that I was reflecting on recently too, and it made me laugh in a very kind of like maniacal and ironic sort of way, because for many people, we like to have this kind of like safety blanket of thought or a belief that we can like fall back into in order to help us get through life and get through the world. And my interests in my life, I guess, are accuracy, veracity, and truth. And there's something I said about truth, like, what if the truth is undiscernible, unknowable, or non-existent? And so then the closest we get is being true to and with ourselves. And that's why these observations are very important to me, because it's me being true with myself. And being true with myself happens to be something that, when I'm doing it, I extend it beyond my phenomenology. So, like, just because something happens to me a certain way, I'm not going to blanket assume that it's going to happen for other people the same way. And, like, my beliefs are going to reflect that as well, my quote unquote beliefs. So, for example, there is the idea that a lot of people have that, God knows what's best for me. God, the universe has got my back. And for me personally, I can't use that, because I can't help but extrapolate it outside of myself and think about all the other people in the world that might not really be able to say the same thing, that may believe in a certain system of faith more than I do. Because at that point, it kind of is like, well, why do you get a special plan and like a huge swath of people kind of get fucked in this life, you know? Um, and so this is again why I just kind of like paradigm hop, because that's me being honest and authentic about the situation. And that's, if to me, if we want to touch reality and like get as close as we can to what is real and what the fuck is actually going on around us, because nobody knows. That's why we have all these systems, and that's why we're always arguing about shit. um, and we don't want to admit that we don't know. Because it's painful, you know, especially when there seems to be ramifications for not knowing. Another person that has more of the behavior of that they know can kind of like shit on somebody for seemingly not knowing something. It's kind of societal. It's almost ingrained into us. But I'm losing my way a little bit, and so I thank you all for kind of sticking with me through this. It's just like a very interesting thing that I am trying to, parse. Like one of the things I'm like wondering about is with my position in a lot of things, because I don't really have beliefs. Like I said, I just kind of hop between paradigms. But I've always kind of looked at pride for myself as a negative thing, and I kind of look at pride in other people that aren't very mindful as a negative thing. And because I don't trust myself, I'm like, oh well, I should just fucking avoid that so I don't end up like a pompous prick that I happen to despise, right? But I'm wondering right now, like, should I be proud of myself for this kind of work, this kind of like depth philosophy that I've done, on a consistent basis, like in a lived way, because this isn't stuff that I mean, I do write about some of this, but I don't necessarily share it. And like when I do write about it, it's kind of like a lot of disparate points. So it's, I'm trying to discern and understand and learn, like, how do I feel about this? Um, because another thing that I want to recognize in myself is that even though I didn't really realize it in the time, that my pursuit, there's a certain amount of bravery there, because I don't have the um, kind of fundamental base to come back to comfort myself. I was about to talk about this earlier before I lost my way, but a lot of people have a base that they come to for belief, right? Things get hard, they have like something they can put their faith in, and I've already talked about like why that's like somewhat hard. But it's so funny just like trying to understand all of this like for myself right now, because I was just so conditioned to not pay attention to myself in this way, is, to be honest, kind of fascinating. I think the other thing that's funny about this too, and this is probably for a few different reasons that I've like mentioned before, but it's just like so hard for me to keep my thoughts organized nowadays. Um, and it's like funny too, because a lot of times when I do these videos and I do these recordings, there's a whole lot of anxiety. And that's like what I'm trying to work towards, is being with that and getting the fuck over it. Um, yeah. So thank you. I mean, a lot of this is unaddressed ADHD. I'm extremely stressed the fuck out. Like, life is just a roller coaster. And that's not to bitch. It's just to, I guess, extend some explanation for understanding. Um, I think another thing I need to do is like remember that I'm loved. But I think that at this point, I don't feel very grounded as I'm speaking. I feel like I've lost my way just a little bit too much. Um, so I'm kind of contemplating wrapping this one up. Mm. So we're gonna try this one more time. The thought finally came back up. So I don't have a base of faith, right? I hop between paradigm and paradigm and paradigm, and like when I need to come back to a place to like find some safety, it's usually philosophy, and that's a catch-22, because philosophy makes me paradigm hop again. um, but I think that it's a unique way of interacting with the world and with thoughts and ideas, especially thoughts and ideas, because really, like, we interact with thoughts and ideas more than we actually interact with the world. It's our thoughts and ideas of the world that we interact with more than the world itself. Um, yeah, that being said, if you've never heard of the debate of scientific realism versus anti-realism, I encourage you to look it up. The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a pretty long article on it if you would like to check it out. Be prepared to have your mind turned a little inside out potentially, because this is one of those very subtle, nuanced topics that isn't put into the mainstream for consideration when it comes to science. And then also, that being said, the other thing that's funny to me about how science is used, especially by the mainstream and by people that are in the fray, is like, oh, science says, science is no better than religion nowadays, because the science doesn't say anything. The science is a methodology. It's a methodology for us to derive a certain amount of information. What we say and what is said is based on interpretation. So yeah, fucking random. Sorry. How my mind just bounces around from shit to shit. Well, I'm going to try to take care of a few other things before I go for a nice little hike today. But give me a like, give me a subscribe. Please feel free to share. The more the merrier. Let's make it a party. Be good to you, be good to others, and have a wonderful day. Sending you lots of love.